Hey everyone, Chen here, bringing you guys another video. Today's video is going to be very interesting. It is going to be me basically explaining my opinion as to why Onhit is inferior on Akshan. This is an opinion that isn't just something I only have. A bunch of Akshan mains, I stream, and a bunch of Akshan mains that come into my stream will share their sentiment or will share the same sentiment that Onhit is just inferior on a champion like Akshan. So, without further ado, this is going to be kind of formatted in a TED Talk. I'll explain some things, show some things, and hopefully you guys can learn. And let me know down in the comments below whether you agree or disagree. Before we start, though, I do want to mention one quick thing. The only thing that this doesn't fully apply to is, in my opinion, top lane Akshan. I think Onhit is probably top 3 on just in general to build on top Akshan. Top lane Akshan is very limited, and you are versing against a very select amount of champions in which Onhit can thrive. But even then, in my personal opinion, I think a different build is just almost always better consistently. And then for mid lane, Onhit is inferior in every single situation. So without further ado, let me explain why that is in this video. Real quick, I do want to mention that this video is going to also touch on a little bit of Akshan's weakness as a champion. Akshan, in my personal opinion, is a very flawed champion, hence why he has a low pick rate, hence why he doesn't feel satisfying to play sometimes, stuff like that. In this video, I do want to explain a couple aspects of that. I did want to make a full video, and I don't think this is going to do justify as to that full video. I do want to do that video in the future, way down in the line, when I can compose thoughts better. But without further ado, let's get right into it. Starting off with my first and basically the most important point is, as you can see right here, Akshan's attack range is 500. Now, if you don't know that, in terms of marksman, in terms of any champion that will go on hits, that is one of the lowest, if not, it is the lowest attack range on, a marksman that aims to go on hit. The whole premise, let me define on hit real quick for you guys. The whole premise of on hit is you are basically packing a bunch of items so your autos deal a bunch of damage, if that makes sense. And you're doing it at a fast rate, stuff like that, right? So, why does this matter? Well, when you look at Akshan's kit, right? Let's look at his kit for a second. You have his passive, which is, in my opinion, basically the only thing that synergizes with on hit. You have a double attack, which doesn't really matter. This is the biggest thing, though. Whenever you mark him 3 times, you deal an increased damage. So when you have on hits, when you're doing a bunch of damage, when you have a bunch of attack speed, and you're just auto, you're going to do a decent amount of damage. Yes, I agree. But let's look at his other abilities. Q. No synergy with on hit whatsoever. Doesn't matter how many autos you get. Q doesn't affect that at all. W. Doesn't matter at all. E. One can argue that it kind of matters. Your E is like a reposition tool. Yes. But when you're Eing in for damage, right? Because Akshan's main, when you think of Akshan, you don't really think of, hey, I want to do maximum DPS. When you think of Akshan, when I think of Akshan at least, I'm like, hey, I want to reach their backline and disrupt the team fight, right? With my E, and then get a reset, and then keep going and keep going. On hits with E doesn't do most damage. It just doesn't, right? So when you're using it, when you're building on hit and you're using E to go in, chances are you're not even going to kill a squishy. Does that make sense? So E, in my personal opinion, I would argue, doesn't really synergize with on-hit Akshan at all. Obviously, the mobility is great. Yes, I do agree. When you're going on hit, you have that sort of mobility to play for. But if someone's on top of you, E's not going to peel you, right? That's a common known fact of Akshan as a weakness. So think about it from a fighting perspective. You need to go from 500 attack range into a fight, and if they ever reach on top of you, you can never E out because they're just colliding you and your E cannot, it's not guaranteed mobility. So you're just putting yourself in danger every single 500 attack range that you want to hit them. Does that make sense? And then obviously R, we don't need to get into it. R has 0 synergy with on hit. You are doing negative damage when you build on hit with and pressing R, right? Crit does more damage, lethality does more damage, anything other does more damage with R. So, to my point, in my opinion, I think the only synergy with on hit is the passive, right? Now, the reason why I said in the beginning of the video, top lane can build on hit is because I do think top lane do value this sort of passive. You can harass, you can do stuff like that, and the kiting is very good. I agree with that. But once again, Nothing else of his kit really synergizes with on hit. Now, let me take a look at to another champ that has been dominating the Rift. Recently did get nerfed, so thankfully it's kind of gone, but ADTF, right? Think about ADTF, and you can kind of take this with any other champ. First and foremost, 25 extra attack range, that is big. You might be like, that's very little. That is big, 25 different range. If Akshan had 25 extra range, I think on hit is actually genuinely like top 3 build at all times, but Akshan has 500 range, right? So TF has 25 range, but let's just look at what synergizes with AD on hit TF. Think about Kraken Slayer. Think about Kraken Slayer builds anything that TF kind of goes, right? Q, no synergy. Passive, no synergy. Pick a card, massive synergy with on hit. You are casting a gold card that stuns the target. It doesn't, does it say the stun duration? It does. You are stunning them for upwards to 2 seconds. Does that make sense? So when you stun someone with max gold card, you're stunning for 2 seconds and then you're just pummeling them with autos. Even 1 second stun, you are getting basically 2 to 3 autos extra every single time you have a gold card. That is massive to play into TF, right? And then obviously this, I think we would all agree, at least for its old iteration, it did get nerfed, but its old iteration, this is 90 times better than Akshan's passive. At 3 stacks, his next attack is empowered, and then also he has bonus attack speed, and he just keeps stacking, right? He just keeps on stacking, bunch of attack speed, gold card into a bunch of attack damage, into a bunch of autos, and you are just dead. And then R, I would even argue his R is probably more reliable than Akshan's E in a lot of cases. You know, you can go for roams, gold card, stuff like that. You can't really run. So this also plays into ADTF, right? Cool. The reason why I'm pinpointing this is to kind of show you guys a lot of champs that build on hit have more synergies with on hit, if that makes sense. I have this graphic over here, just a random Reddit post that I found that kind of demonstrates this point perfectly. Think about champions from the 500 range that build on hit. Kindred is a champ that builds on hit. Kog'Maw is a champ that builds semi on hit. I mean, he goes like Winsus and stuff. And then Sivir's another champ that can build on hit. Sivir kind of has multiple builds, so I won't really pinpoint her. But think about these two champs, for example. Kindred. What does Kindred have? Well, first and foremost, Kindred has a passive, so he's exceeding the 500 range every single game. Second of all, he has Q on a 2-second cooldown, a reposition tool every 2 seconds. Third of all, his E synergizes 10 times better than anything Akshan has in his kit. And fourth of all, his R, if someone's diving in and he needs, you know, to self-peel, he presses R. Akshan doesn't have that, right? Think about Kog'Maw now. Kog'Maw has E, slow. It's alright. W is a massive amplifier that is just pumping a bunch of DPS. And then also Kog'Maw has his R that has an insane amount of range, so he can play team fights from afar. Whereas Akshan, if you build on hit, you're not playing team fights from afar. And then obviously his Q for armor shred, just Kog'Maw, think about Kog'Maw as an artillery that deals a bunch of damage. If you have a 1v1 on hit, Kog'Maw versus Akshan, Kog'Maw will almost always win, assuming that Akshan's just not directly in his range, right? Kog'Maw, if he can start the fight from afar and then just pummel damage, it's going to be an easy fight for Kog'Maw. Now, the thing I want to bring up is other champs that have 500 range, what do they have that Akshan doesn't? Kind of pinpointing as to why Akshan's kit is flawed. For example, Samira. Samira has W self-peel tool, E dashes that are more reliable than Akshan in a lot of cases. Obviously, sometimes it's not. But her R absolutely nukes a team fight, right? Akshan can't do that. Akshan has 1 DPS. That's another reason why on hit's flawed. If you go on hit, you can only target 1 person. That's just Akshan as a kit in general. Samira, the moment she has uptime and she presses R, she can easily penta, right? Lucian's another good example, where they're not building on hit, so I'm not mentioning anything about on hit, but I'm more so mentioning the fact that they have the same attack range as Akshan, but the people that classify as 500 attack range, they do so much more than what Akshan can do, if that makes sense. Especially if on hit, Akshan's building on hit. Lucian, for example, you know, he has his Q that can hit from pretty far. I don't know the exact range, but it's probably like upwards to 600. His W, and then his E, which goes on a very, very low cooldown based on what Lucian builds. And then his R is a massive range that it can wipe. Anyone would agree, Akshan R versus Lucian R, it's not even close, right? So the reason why I'm pinpointing this is for the fact that these champions at 500 range has way more tools than Akshan. Does that make sense? Like Sivir E, Sivir R, you know, bunch of peel. Lucian E, Lucian R, bunch of range and bunch of peel. Samira W, Samira E, Samira R, bunch of teamfight AoE, bunch of peel. Kog'Maw, I will agree. Kog'Maw is very squishy and plays into a similar Akshan weakness, but DPS-wise, Kog'Maw's always going to pump more damage than Akshan. And then Kindred, a bunch of mobility, stuff like that, right? The reason why I'm pinpointing this is just to show you guys how flawed Akshan's kit is. So, how do you fix or patch or band-aid Akshan's flawed kit? That's what I want to figure out. Alright, now let me bring you to the client. The reason why Akshan is flawed and the reason why I build Poke, and I am one of the originators of Poke, is because it fixes Akshan's weakness in the 500 range. Going back to why Akshan is flawed as a champion, he has no real identity. We just compared how every other 500 champion range that's marksman just strives a lot better than Akshan as a kit, right? So let's look at on-hit items, right? Now this is obviously no in particular order, but the reason why I'm pinpointing it is because these are all on-hit Akshan items, right? Take a look at it for a second. All of these items are not really giving him survivability, besides Terminus and besides Wit's End. You can argue RFC is giving him some sort of survivability, but I would also counter-argue in the sense that if you're going something like this, you're not really doing damage. Does that make sense? So you're not maximizing your DPS for on-hit, so it doesn't really make sense if you're building that. But the thing is, real quick, I do want to note, Wit's End nerfs or changes actually did nerf on-hit Akshan heavily, which in my opinion is why Akshan on-hit is just inferior now. I used to say on-hit was top 3 Akshan build. Now I wouldn't even say it's top 5 in my humblest opinion. Because Wit's End changed, now it's giving tenacity, which Akshan doesn't care for, and it's just a terrible item in my opinion. So the reason why I pinpoint this is any standard Akshan build. This is a very standard on-hit build. This is a very standard on-hit build. But one thing you're noticing, regardless of what items you're combining, you're still very squishy. Yes, Terminus is giving you some sort of resistances, but it's only when you auto-attack and get that sort of resist going. So the reason why on-hit is flawed, based on everything I've said in this video, you're a 500 range character with very low self-peel options and very low mobility. Granted, if you cannot E, how are you ever going to out-damage other champions that, you know, have the capability in the 500 range, either going on hit or any other build? You're not out-damaging them. You are just a worse version, if that makes sense. And so that is why, in my opinion, on hit is completely flawed. Now, going back to why I think currently my 2 most build itemization and why it kind of patches the weaknesses of on hit is, first off, Stridebreaker. You go Kraken Borg, you are getting basically an essence of on hit, so you can deal with tanks, you can deal with squishies, you can spike accordingly, but when you get your 3rd item, Stridebreaker, you can actually go in. That's the thing. If you play on hits, you're in a 5v5, you can never use your E, or else you're dead. Because E is a single target, you're never going to target a backline, and you're never going to assassinate a backline. And you're never going to assassinate a frontline, if you ever E in, because it's just less damage. But with this build, you have the capabilities to actually E in, Stridebreaker, disconnect, be tanky enough to where you live, get a reset because you have these sort of on-hit components, and boom, then you are actually a champion. Now, you pair this itemization with Terminus, and this synergy is absolutely bonkers. You're basically on hit, but you can actually play the game. This is why, in my opinion, if you're playing top lane, I think this build is almost always better, unless you're into like a tanky matchup, where you can just absolutely bully, they cannot interact with you. You can go for that sort of DPS. I do agree. On hit, you are going to outdamage. This build, you are going to outdamage this build. I agree. I'm not delusional. If you're standing still, and they're standing still, and you're auto, you're going to outdamage. But that's never really the case. They're never going to allow you to do that, hence why Stridebreaker is better. Now, second point I want to mention, which I kind of mentioned earlier, but the reason why you go Poke is to patch or band-aid one of Akshan's weakness. We just discussed how Akshan has a 500 attack range. This allows you to actually play from afar and not enter a dangerous zone because you're just out of camo, you're hitting them, and that auto, you're packing all your punch into that auto, and you do that multiple times, you scale up, you get more items to play for that, and you are actually able to play the game. So in my opinion, these two builds at full build are 10 times better than Onhit, and in my opinion, I think the only time Onhit is good is like the first two items. Hence why you go the first two items at Stridebreaker, if that makes sense, right? If you're reaching third item and you're building Gwinsu's, you're building Wit's End, you're building anything of these, you just can't play the game. It's not feasible for you to be at 500 range to play out a team fight, because at that point, just lock in a different champion and you're going to be more useful, if that makes sense. So anyways, that is the video. 15-minute rant, but hopefully that explains why, and hopefully you guys can understand why Onhit, in my opinion, and in a bunch of other prestigious high elo Akshan mains opinions, Onhit is just inferior. I personally never run Onhit anymore. I run Stridebreaker every single game that I even need to consider going Onhit. It is just the better build. You're going to lose damage, but you're going to be tankier as a result, and that is just higher value. Thank you all so much for watching. Let me know down in the comments below whether you agree, disagreements, agreements, stuff like that. Let me know down in the comments below. Thank you all so much for watching. Hope you all have a great rest of your day. Chen out.